2 o'clock, and it's Christmas Day of all the tenants organization in Norway. You are the same as me. You are active in your own organization, and as tenants and as union, we changed the situation for tenants all over the world, and we also changed in our society. So welcome to the International Union of Tenants World Conference.
Between 2010 and 2021, average rental prices increased by 16%, and much more in some member states. And house prices increased by 42%. As a result, an increasing number of people in the EU face difficulties in finding accommodation. The COVID-19 pandemic increased inequalities in access to affordable housing, and the surge in energy prices caused by Russia's criminal war in Ukraine has exacerbated the affordability issue. We need massive public and private investment in affordable housing to avoid more people being pushed into poverty.
Yeah, the main challenges are, of course, rent increases. So especially since the war in the Ukraine, we really experience a massive increase on top of what we already saw the last years, especially because of the energy prices that were increasing too. So that's one of the biggest problems. And on the other hand, we don't have enough apartments for rent, which means in the whole of Germany there's a lack of 700,000 apartments that we need, but we still are not improving enough.
But I'm proud standing here, and I know that if I look out in this room, you are the same as me. You are active in your own organization, and as tenants and as union, we changed the situation for tenants all over the world, and we also changed in our society. We have now a whole world in a cost living crisis. We have inflation, we have high energy cost, and we have a housing situation. Because today we all know that the party is over for these kind of landlords, and now they have a hangover, because now the high interest is about to be paid. And as a union of tenants, we all over the world need to say that the tenants don't have to pay this party. It's the owner that has to pay for this party.
We want to have more housing, increase the supply of housing, municipal in partnership, both private and private, so more housing in all fields. We want to reduce the asymmetries in access to housing, and we want to regenerate what we call the forgotten city.
And now I'd like to introduce a member from the Lisbon Tenants Organization, who has been the president and the president of the General Assembly. You are also a member of the National Commission for Evolution and Urban Buildings here in Portugal, and I had the pleasure to having lunch together, sit near to you and talk. So the floor is yours. Antonio Maria Ferreira. I'm not so sure.
Good afternoon, Mr. President of the Board, Mary Linda, Madam Councilwoman of Lisbon City, Mr. Filipe Roseta, members of the board, Messieurs and French. Once again, welcome to Lisbon. Lisbon is an beautiful city, but like other Portuguese cities, namely Oporto is the second most important city in Portugal. It suffers from serious housing problems, like Mrs. Filipa Rosetta has just said yes. Here in this neighborhood called Alvalade, where the Hotel Tessie is located, we may not realize this, given that we are in a consolidated urban area built in the first half of the 20th century and inhabited mainly for people belonging to the city's upper middle class. But when we have the opportunity, I think it is tomorrow, to visit other neighborhoods of the city, we will see that there are old urban areas with deteriorated, very deteriorated houses, where the owners do not maintain them, and people who live without the necessary conditions of comfort and safety.
Also around 700,000 apartments, and we stand here in Lisbon today, which have a huge problem with young people that still lives at home. Actually, until the age of 33, which is the highest in whole of Europe. In Sweden, that number is 19. And the other thing I would address is the rent. And here in Lisbon, the rents have been increased with 40% the last 5 years. And we have the same situation in all other European countries.
Today. So 47 is a huge amount. And if you need to pay interest to this amount, it's very important how high these interests are. And they up to 22, they were about, in average, 1.2%, quite low. But now they are rising to 4 or 5%. And this is really the biggest problem for this company.
Just show the benefits and the problems that this market are given to the cities where the activity is more intensive.
It's also about this idea of being where your audience is and knowing where your audience is. This is a case of understanding what they like, what they want, and also what they expect. Because all the channels from your website, your LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook profiles produce huge amounts of data on your audience.
When you do go to the media as a tenant's representative, you have some advantages. And as I said, the journalists are busy. They have to deliver. And that's our advantage, because we can deliver to them so that they can deliver. And then with the good guys, we represent people with low income, some of them in very difficult situations. So with the good guys, everybody can see that.
To take income from people. And this is affecting the country in many, many ways. For example, if from 2005 to 22, 67% of all apartments that came into the new went to investors. Only 1/3 to people actually making homes.
The context, I guess, economically, with the pandemic over the last 3 years, we've been facing probably the largest upward motion of wealth to the fewest. And I think that's a global phenomenon.
To mobilize them with campaigns, to intervene in political decisions, and to continue the fundings of the HLM. HLM is low-cost housing in Quebec, and for here we would compare it as like public housing, because people only pay 25% of their incomes for the rent, and our biggest fights, like years ago, is to maintain the amount to 25%.
But in Australia, unlike many European places, there's a dominance of small-scale investors, and there are large numbers of people who own one, or in fact it's increasing in number, but just maybe one unit. And they're lovingly called the mum and dad investors. So we call them the landlords, but other people call them the mum and dad investors. And it brings different problems than the big scale investors, because what happens is tenancy law is always seen in this context of protecting the nest egg of these mum and dad investors who just have this one property that they're keeping to look after themselves in their retirement. And tenancy law is always seen in this context of balancing the rights and interests of the landlord and the tenant rather than a human right or even a consumer right. So, it's not even seen as consumer protection law really, which might actually take us a bit further than some places that we get to at the moment. And what's increasingly happened in Australia is that we did used to have more social housing, but around 2000, when we had some big tax changes, the capital gains tax was halved on investment properties. So together with the negative gearing, when you only pay half capital gains tax, it's brought massive investment into the private rental market. And in fact, it's like a de facto policy position for the government to invest or to let its tax dollars go to the private rental market rather than social housing. And you've seen this, like social housing used to be like this in terms of housing subsidy and private rental like this, and it's changed now since 2000. But when you talk about this, like what's the social contract that private investors have to provide back for this? It's like, this is my property, I've worked really hard to make this, it's all about me, and you can't tell me that you should be able to modify the property to help you live in the property safely or something. And that's the other aspect about the Australian rental market that it builds in a structural insecurity to it, is that properties change in the market. So if the property, you might be renting a property now, if that property goes for sale, it might be sold to another investor or it might be sold to an owner-occupier.
Everyone was hoping for a broad base of housing measures. They did nothing. They've kept the status quo, all right? And the status quo is something. It is greatly benefiting rich people, developers, property owners, landlords. And unfortunately, all the work that we do, again, it's really just being ignored by a lot of levels of government, even though it's not being ignored by the media. So there's, again, tremendous negative press, but the government's just ignoring that.
But now the prices are just totally obscene. I mean, they are completely inaccessible for not just the vulnerable tenants. I mean, I'm not talking about just the migrants or students or young families or elderly or even the low-class families. I'm talking about the real medium class. They simply don't have any place to go.
Renters having to move, they can't have that sense of belonging. They don't have that sense of belonging. And what does that mean, not to have that? Not to feel you can belong somewhere, you have a place of your own. It has psychological impacts and it has physical health impacts. And there was an argument over the rent. And that memory stuck with me, and those issues of having to move house, we had to move, and so this is deeply personal for me as well, in that sense.
I would say it's also not existing because it's only services that are provided from the Ministry of Social Labor, where they give social apartments to the most vulnerable groups. And even there are discriminated because the criteria for getting a social apartment are quite strict.
So for our campaign, we had one message. It was to stop housing injustice. It's translated otherwise in Swedish, of course. At the same time, it's important to keep the messages simple and tenant-focused, to feel that it's relevant to me every day. The housing policies in this country, it affects me and my future.
The objective is to help public authorities to ensure their balanced development as part of a more sustainable tourism sector. While short-term rental, accommodation, bookings offer benefits for hosts and tourists, we know that, we use it, right? They can also create a lot of challenges and concerns for certain local communities that are struggling, for instance, with a lack of affordable housing and gentrification, as we saw also.
That is the rapidly growing inequalities. Financialization, we have talked a lot about here, gentrification, the ones who attended the Luis study visit yesterday would know perfectly well what I'm talking about, and the cost of living are rising and the legal environment are more insecure now.
I think there's so much good knowledge and so much good discussions we have been having here. So I often feel when I go to a meeting, I feel, oh, now I'm going back to change the world. And I think we have managed to do that also on this World Conference.